Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Thank you, as always, for choosing to spend your time with us today. You know, oftentimes, in fact, the success of your execution efforts is a result not only of the team and the capabilities you have in place, but it's also a reflection of the quality of the counsel and the advisors that you bring with you in the journey. And on this show over the last couple of years, we've spoken with a variety of advisors to agribusinesses. We've had insurance professionals on, ag lenders, investment bankers, M&A advisors, economists, etc. Really a wide plethora of people and perspectives and profiles to help provide a wide, comprehensive lens around strategy execution in agribusiness. But one of the things we haven't had was someone with an engineering, design, and asset build perspective as relates to strategy execution. And if you think about the industry that we're in, and this is not news to any of you, but this is a very asset-heavy, capital-intensive industry and business. You know, we receive and clean and process and store and distribute physical things that all have to run across physical equipment that's operated in physical plants. And when I stop and think about that, it feels like this is a real gap in the program. You know, what are the best thinkers, the best operators, the best resources in the industry from a design, engineering, and build perspective? What do they have to say about strategy execution? What can we learn from them? Sometimes looking in the mirror is a very helpful exercise. But of course, when you look at the mirror, you're subject to all your biases and all your blind spots and all the things that maybe you either don't see or don't want to see or don't want to admit that you see. Whereas when you work with trusted counsel, sometimes they can reflect back on you the true gaps, the true opportunities, and some of the lessons that maybe you've learned a lot and you need to learn again. Maybe you're just hearing them for the first time. At any rate, in service of that, it was a real pleasure here recently to sit down with Matt Frandsen of Keen Project Solutions. Keen is a full-service design build team. They're based in Ankeny, Iowa, and they provide design, engineering, pre-construction, construction management, Millwright, reliability and maintenance services, a really full-service shop, as I said, and they work with and across the ag industry. In fact, in 28 states in the United States and across 5 Canadian provinces. So heavily invested in the work in the industry that we're all in, and very broadly distributed in terms of the nature of people they serve and where they're serving them. This conversation is going to cover a lot of ground, and it's going to be highly relevant to our work. And just a couple of things I want to highlight that I think are kind of reflect back on us. You know, Matt's going to walk us through what does it look like to build and then run a company that's serving clients in a segment of an industry of all sizes. You know, what they've learned from working with the ABCDs of the grain industry, all the way down to working with independent seed companies. What's been successful and some of the parallels maybe with serving growers of varying sizes that you all have in your operations. Matt's going to share the don't miss list, the things that disciplined operators need to be doing to ensure that are done to set up a CapEx project for success. The sneak preview here, the real takeaway is that they're all within your control and they're all self-reinforcing. So you can do them all on your own. And once you do a couple, it makes the other ones start to roll up faster. So really interesting takeaways there. We're going to talk about the trend of insourcing versus outsourcing your design and build capabilities as companies get larger, and kind of the danger of daylight that emerges between the operators and what they want in plant construction and procurement specialists and procurement strategies and how they look at the resources available to help get those projects done. And then lastly, Matt's going to walk us through their very long-term established strategy around developing people and developing talent as a way of not just protecting their business, but protecting their seat at the table. So having a variety of people with different capabilities able to do the things that they need to help their business grow by helping their customers be successful in their capital deployment investments. So wonderful conversation. I'm excited to share it with you. Thank you as always for being a listener, for being a member of the Pacesetter Pod community, and above all, for being a leader in agribusiness that's tuning in and taking a wide lens to help you expand how you think about improving strategy execution. With that, here's my conversation with Matt Frandsen of Keen Project Solutions. Matt, good morning and welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Good morning, Joe. Nice to be here.
Excited for this conversation. I was looking, before we hit record, I mentioned this, but I was looking through our past docket, and I might be wrong, but I don't know that we've had a pure play professional services, technical and professional services business that supports the ag industry on the program before. And if I have, and I've forgotten who that is, I apologize in advance to that guest. This will be an interesting conversation because a lot of what you all do relates to the agricultural industry. It was intimately connected with what happens in agribusiness, but also exists outside of it. And so it's also kind of a chance for us to look in the mirror and hear a bit about what folks that we partner with as we make investments to grow our businesses, what they are seeing as success stories, where they're seeing us maybe trip and fall down, and how they go about building effective organizations to support agribusiness growth. So all that being said, I'm super excited to have you on the show, Matt. You lead Keen Project Solutions. And rather than have me stumble through an introduction of who Keen is, I would love if you could give us the 101, who you guys are, services you offer, and the industries and segments that you serve.
Sure. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'll tell you a bit about Keen. Keen is a relatively new firm. We were established in 2014. We're an engineering and construction firm. We're based out of Ankeny, Iowa. We're deeply rooted in ag and ag-related projects. We established Keen back in 2014. My two business partners and I had been working for another firm, large general contractor. After a purchase, we decided to step out and do our own thing. And today, in the last 11 years, we've grown from 3 employees to 180 employees. We work in 28 states throughout the country and 5 Canadian provinces, providing design, build, and EPC services, or engineering, procurement, construction management services. We have some strong concentration in the seed industry, as well as in the food and milling space. We serve several of what I would call the value-added ag customers. And we have a component of our business that is a little bit heavier in the industrial side. So some manufacturing and other processing, biorefining, that sort of thing. To complement that, over the years, we've developed a commercial business. And in many cases, we're providing commercial offerings to some of our industrial or ag industrial customers. So really excited to talk with you today, Joe.
So I'm interested, what would be, just for illustrative examples, a commercial offering? What would be an example of that?
Yeah, today we're completing some projects for some of our customers, both value-added ag customers as well as some customers in the ethanol space. We're building offices, roadways, R&D spaces, labs, that sort of thing. It's a nice complement when we're coming in to help them with those other, we often refer to as people spaces, versus the operating shop floor, the processing tower or, the elevator.
Interesting. And I imagine that to some degree that while that type of service is related to the underlying facility builds that they are pursuing, it also is a diversification play, I would imagine. And as attention shifts away from modernizing offices, say in a post-pandemic environment, imagine that, or if capital requirements shift and they're moving away from building out refining capacity to something else, that kind of gives you a little bit of an opportunity to play at multiple spaces along and build in engineering needs.
That's correct. For us, it was a diversification. We had some background. Some of our team members, one of my business partners had a strong background working in the commercial space. And it's been a nice complement for some of our customers because it allows us to extend further and provide them with kind of broader service, because so often they're building, maybe it's a plant expansion or an elevator expansion, and they need that space for employee welfare or other needs that come along. And it's nice to have team members that are prepared to do that work.
Certainly. One of the things that in our pre-calls earlier this summer here, Matt, that really struck me, we could spend a lot of time talking about how do you build a successful organization that's going to increasingly do different types of projects, like we just talked about, right? Diversifying the offering. But what I think is really interesting is a business like Keen operates also across a diversification of clients within a specific industrial segment or business segment. And what I mean by that is clients of very different sizes. You work with everything from the ABCDs all the way down to relatively hyper local co-ops and everything in between. And as I think about that, and how would they have different requirements. They're investing different amounts of capital. They're building to different maybe specifications and different corporate expectations. And when I think about that, I think about our agribusiness leaders that are listening today that are out there serving producers of dramatically different sizes, right? And you've got your farmer that's working on 12,000 acres versus another guy that's working on 1,200. And you have to build a team supported by processes and skills and cultures and expectations that can support across that spectrum if you choose to compete with the entire portfolio of customers. So I guess my question in all that, Matt, is how have you, or what's your experience been in staffing and building a business that's working with everything from the top grain commodity handlers in the country, in the world, all the way down to some significantly smaller outfits? I'm thinking about, it's not just about the right number of people. The right number of people is probably the easiest thing to solve, but how do you have the right skills to serve different customers? How do you have the right culture, the right processes to serve those different needs?
Well, I think it starts with any customer. You have to begin with really understanding what their end goals are. And for us, it's been about coming to the table. We at a point, we're a new company, but we weren't new to the industry. So we had learned over the years what was important to our customers. We learned to appreciate and respect, their situation, their constraints, how capital flows through their organization, the windows of opportunity that they were trying to participate in, or the problems they were trying to solve. Maybe it was a capacity gain they were seeking, or dealing with a quality issue with their products, or food safety or feed safety, a number of different things. It's really important for us at the start, principally, to understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. And if we have team members who are attentive and ask good questions and create the space for that customer to express their needs, we win. They win. They get what they're seeking. We have a clear sense of what the design intent needs to be, and all the processes that start to layer into moving from a concept all the way on through a completed asset. You start to see where this early work, the front end, and clarity about their end goals really comes to bear. For us, having team members who are good listeners is paramount. We're builders, but we also have an engineering mindset. And we need team members. We often say we want to hire great talent and unleash their creative powers by hiring great people, creating the space for them to working in our system, spending time with those customers, coming to understand their needs, and then go to work on trying to provide a creative solution for them in a variety of different ways. That may be smaller operators who may have one facility, or maybe on the front end of trying to build their first facility, versus some of our large customers where they've got assets throughout the country and elsewhere that we're serving them. And in any case, you have to understand what's driving them, what's driving their business.
I think that is paramount, and it's kind of the obvious answer, but also the hardest thing to do, because when a customer comes in and they start talking about, we want to build a facility in this location with this amount of put-through capabilities, this much storage, this much refining capacity, it's really easy to get ahead of yourself. And it's not maybe the specifications that are highlighted in RFP might not be the actual root cause objective of the project. One of the things I have observed is that regardless of the company's size, there are some projects, in my case, I'm thinking of acquisitions that are being pursued or have been closed, of varying sizes, where early on in our engagement with our clients and our customers, we will start to ask, okay, to build an effective integration plan, let's start from why you did this integration and work back. Right. So was this to roll up the capacity in a specific geography? Was this access to technology? Was this access to people? Was this access to customer lists? What was it that drove this? because then we can embed that in the way that we go about the work. And we see folks all on the spectrum of being able to very clearly articulate it and support it with analysis and goals and objectives and say, this is exactly why we did it. And it provides a level of clarity that is very empowering and actually accelerates the work. And we have folks that say, oh, that's a really good question. And then we go around the room and there's 5 people in the room and we get 6 different opinions around why they're doing it. My question to you is, do you tend to see in the work that you do that folks come in and they're able to very clearly, if your staff is asking the questions and they're listening, can they clearly articulate the objectives? Or do you sometimes find you and your team in a position of helping to coach and support the customer along that journey of getting clear around what are they trying to accomplish so that you can actually design and build something effectively around that objective?
Well, I think it depends on the situation, but so often we come to the table and we experience what you were describing. 6 people at the table, 5 or 6 different opinions about what the end goals are, what the objectives are, what the priority or time scale, budgets, you name it, all those attributes of the project that need to have been worked through and hammered out so that all the stakeholders have a clear sense of where they're going, what in the end they are going to be, how they're going to operate, what the conditions are. Something that's really important for us is first things first is you have to have the right people in the room. So I believe, or we believe, that there is no substitution for getting in the room with your customer. We'll often have whiteboard or Post-it notes or other design tools. Maybe it's Google Earth, and we're showing them, like, this is your site. This is another site. Let's, range around. What's a facility that you've seen before that you think is laid out properly for truck traffic in and out or something? You can get into those kinds of, that kind of exploration that populates thought. First and foremost, our customers have to start with an owner program. An owner program is a set of clear objectives for their project. It brings definition. It gives us some sense of what they're trying to achieve, but also then starts to bring important information, basic data, schedules, arrangements, preferences that they may have in terms of operating other of their facilities or their existing facility today and adds they want to make. It starts to bring all of that together. And many times, if they're not prepared with that information, or if they don't have the experience developing those documents, that's then where we step in to play that role. Now, we have to have people that are prepared to do that. So if you're talking about a seed facility, for example, it's very important that we have a seedsman in the room, someone who understands how the process works and the variability and all the conditions that customer is seeking, whether it's purity or viability of the seed or, speed to market, whatever it is that they're trying to address. We need to have knowledgeable people in the room who can guide that discussion and really do the discovery work to pull information out of that customer. And then we work together with them to document it. And just that process alone, in so many different instances, Joe, I can share where you've seen these breakthroughs where the customer gets a clear sense and they start to build, at least they start to come around the idea of what it is they're trying to accomplish. You see some ownership sometimes from different of their stakeholders. Maybe it's the operator or it's other of their team members. Maintenance managers often, if they have a seat at the table, they can share their concerns for how they're going to maintain this facility over the years or how they're going to staff and all those sorts of things that can be a product of a good upfront work to develop that scope.
And I would presume that kind of upfront facilitation and expert guidance, right? Coaching and supporting people through the process of articulating the objective, thinking about preference, thinking about schedule, thinking about data, all the things that looking at other examples that they're trying to emulate, you all being in the position of doing that, I would presume creates a stickiness in that relationship that then puts you in a position to help actually execute the project later on. I think sometimes there can be a hesitancy with some folks to say, well, that's the upfront scoping work. We have to have that contractually tight because, we don't want to help them design something and they go off to build it with somebody else. But I think if you do it well and you do it authentically, it actually creates a sort of, I don't want to say intimacy, but a connection with the client where they know that you helped them bring out what they actually wanted to accomplish. And then you have that trusted partner to move into the next phases. Have you experienced that, or do you sometimes see washout after that upfront work when then things fizzle and they go a different direction with a different supplier?
So certainly sometimes there is some washout. I think actually we often counsel our customers, go slow to go fast. So slow down the process, create the space to have those good discussions, to do that front end work. We're doing design work or discovery work that's then leading to some design, that's then leading to engineering, which then is leading to procurement and so on, to move through the project. And if the team or the customer will allow for that time on the front end for a proper process to vet out those ideas and so on, it's really important. So often what we see though is customers, they may be concerned about the process, and they often are not willing to be vulnerable in the sense of talking about what's working, what's not working. Maybe, the fear of like airing their laundry with us as an outside service provider coming in. And I would tell you is there's lots of tools that we all are familiar with, whether it's non-disclosure agreements and IP agreements and all those things that, one, we can start there and make sure that all those agreements are in place so that the information that the customer owns, it stays with them. And then everybody's clear-headed. And that can be a chain of agreements. Maybe there's a particular equipment provider or subconsultant who needs to be involved. We'll make sure that all of those parties that are coming to the table sit within those agreements so that that information stays where it belongs in the ownership of that customer. But once you've got those elements in place, if you create the space to have the right people at the table, it's amazing what you can do to propel the project and effectively move things in the direction that allows for the right input from those that would be a party to it. We see some customers that have time constraints, or they have other windows of opportunity they're trying to capture, and they elect not to go down that path, which is a choice. But it sometimes ends up being, it's harder. They may not actually get to all the attributes that we're seeking. They might not have the operability, or maybe the fit and finish or functionality doesn't exactly meet what they were hoping for. And so that's where we just believe is going slow, working in a virtual environment where you're designing, you're on a computer screen, you're demoing. There's all kinds of really interesting technology that we use today in the industry to model, to show, particle flow analysis. What's going to happen when I'm bringing product in, running it through these conveyors and through this bin, and when it hits this particular transition, what's happening to, my product as a customer, whether it's a grain or seed or food or inputs to something else. And those are things that with proper time on the front end, we can assess and then carry that information forward into designs and the overall design intent for the project.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
One of the things that was coming through there, you talked about the maybe discomfort or frankly outright unwillingness to be vulnerable. And maybe it's their dirty laundry. Maybe it's because they feel like if they tell you everything that they're trying to do, that you're just going to lick your chops and see dollar signs because, you help them, design this Taj Mahal of assets. When I think that there's an unwillingness to be vulnerable, there's a variety of root causes of it. And it's really incumbent upon all of us who are advisors to these agribusinesses, if we pick up on it, to just name it. Because at the end of the day, and I've had this experience personally, there's sometimes going to be clients where, I've even asked, is there something that I'm doing in the way I present myself, the way I'm asking questions, the way I'm documenting the discussions? Is there something that I'm doing that's giving you pause and creating reluctance to be completely transparent and open? If there is, I need to know so I can own that or change it or clarify why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if they're not willing to share that, if there is this latent level of mistrust or just lack of trust, you almost need to consider whether or not it's an effective partnership, because at the end of the day, the objectives of the project, the quality of the project, the deliverable will be substandard, and no one's going to enjoy the work as much as they could along the way. The other thing that you said that I think was really important, and this kind of takes me to where I wanted to go next with the discussion. You talked about some folks will be trying to hit maybe it's a particular time of year, a particular market opportunity. For whatever reason is they have a narrow window through which to execute. And doing that is their choice, and it has trade-offs. In those situations, it's really important that all of us, leaders inside the business, advisors outside the business, we make those choices and those trade-offs explicit. Because sometimes it is so, I'm guessing for you and your team, Matt, when people say, well, we're going to have to do a light version of XYZ activity because we have to move forward into permitting. In the moment exactly what those knock-on effects are going to be. And we're not there to say, hey, consider this because you're wrong for doing this. We're going to say, consider this because it's going to deliver an outcome you have to live with. The project will end for all of us. We will go home. We'll do the next project. But if something is built not to spec, built not to intention, built not to objective, because they made that choice to move fast, again, that's fine. But I think it's really important that we help them see that these choices are explicit and that they do have trade-offs. Building upon all that, you guys are expert designers, you're builders, you're construction professionals, you're engineers. I imagine you also are crackerjack project managers. You kind of have to be, right? I'm going to make that assumption because
yes, you do.
You might say 10 years you're a new company, but you probably wouldn't have made it 2 if you were lousy project managers. And in our industry, we've always had narrow margins. And in a time like this, we have low commodity prices and a higher cost of capital. The need to really design and then plan and execute these projects is arguably never been higher, because you could so quickly destroy the value. As you work with your customers, maybe there's some things you talked about already, but what are the top handful of things that you see that the most successful customers do, whether they're working with you or not, to set up and execute the best projects? I mean, what are the things that they simply cannot skip? They cannot go past, they cannot miss?
I think there's a few things that relate that we don't want to miss on. One is they need to get to know their service providers. And that requires some work, vetting or qualifying the parties that would be providing engineering or construction services or the equipment, to make sure that they really understand, and to the extent that they're able, to build a relationship with them, to understand and create the space where that party is comfortable. There's some level of trust. I think that is a critical piece that you mentioned. You used the word trust. I think that's part of the process. I think to the extent that the customer can ask for transparency in the process. So often we get hung up on the front end with terms and conditions and fees. And it seems like sometimes we just need to demystify the process. Like, what's this going to cost me? Where are you padding your numbers? Where is all the float or, the excess that's built into this to cover whatever it might be, mistakes or even to, profit from this job? I think to the extent that you as a customer or as a customer, if they're willing to have those upfront discussions and create the space. Now, not all parties, not all engineers or construction firms or design builders are going to come to the table prepared to work in a transparent environment. But I think to the extent that our owners can engage with those types of firms, it creates the basis for them to make informed decisions. They see the information in terms of maybe it's competing quotes in a sense of just understanding what the numbers represent and are they qualified? And am I really getting in both cases, the same offering or not. Because sometimes we often see is all things are not equal. You may get one representation after having made a request, and it's very different than the other. So I think that's an important one. If I were to quick hit a few, as I would say, we talked about it before, but understanding the end goal. And it's that piece we talked about, having clarity of all the stakeholders. We often talk to it as the conditions of satisfaction, like what's going to satisfy that customer. Another news, I said it before, but it's this creating the space and allowing the time. Going slow to go fast. If it is possible to slow down the front end and to begin that discovery work, go through concepting and design, and bring the right parties to the table, it'll improve your project. And then I think somewhere in the middle of all projects, there becomes this point where we've done a lot of front end work, and now we're getting excited about having that asset and using that asset. And it takes time. There's a process that we have to go through. And we often talk about, you just have to trust the process. Customers should have high expectations, though, that you should expect that any of your service providers are communicating with you and they're keeping you informed. They're inviting you in to see the facilities. It's your capital at work here. So I think it's important that you also, in trusting the process, you also, though, go and take stock of the work that's being done.
Those are great. I'm going to reorder them here in a minute as I think about them linearly. I'm not an engineer. I tried for the first 2 years of college and it didn't work out. So here I am. But what's interesting about this, two things. One, they're all within the power of any individual customer to do, right? These might be difficult things, but they don't need to go hire somebody to do the work, and we'll kind of go through it. So it's within their control. And two, they're kind of self-reinforcing. So if you do some of them right on the front end, it actually helps do the other ones well. And so I'm going to recap, and I'll reshuffle them here, Matt. But starting with the conditions of satisfaction, as you said. So understand the end goal. So get clear. If you're thinking about building a new refinery, a new agronomy services location, a new truck dispatch spot, whatever it is, whether it's with a partner or not, do as much work as you can to get very clear on what is the objective and the goal. In the process of then thinking about how you're going to go about creating the space and allowing the time, the go slow to go fast. So now is not the time to rush on the front end, because you're going to make decisions that are going to echo for years. And we've all been assigned to work at plants, taken over geographies within a business that has a particular plant, and you go through and you walk through it. I live in a 145-year-old house. Every time I walk through this house, you're thinking, why the hell is that door right there? Right. And maybe they didn't go slow to go fast, but clearly they didn't think long term, because now the things, the plant, the home, the whatever is in this state where it doesn't flow. It doesn't make sense. Suddenly you're operating your business around the irrational constraints of the location versus optimizing what was properly built. Knowing your providers and building some relationships is really important, as you said. And then also expecting them to meet you with some transparency. If we're expecting our customers to be very transparent and vulnerable in that discovery phase, we in turn as service providers, whether it's M&A advisory services like we do, design and build services like you all do at Keen, being willing to show the cost stack of the proposal to some degree. Being willing to show, hey, and here's why we do it. Here's why this margin on its face might seem, and you might be kind of shocked by it, but here's our experience in these kinds of projects. And here's what happens if we outperform. Here's how much the margin capture goes back to the client, for example. And I don't want to get into your contracting processes, but that cost stack and helping them understand and demystify the process. And then at the end of the day, if you've done all those things, if you've understood the objectives, if you've created the time, if you've gotten to know your providers, if you've gotten that transparency going both ways, you should be able to trust the process while also holding them to high expectations. And so I think it's an amazing list, because like I said, they kind of all self-reinforce. There's nothing on here you can't do. There's nothing that prevents you from saying, we're going to take our time. There's nothing prevents you from saying, let's understand what we're really trying to do. There's nothing to say, we're going to be vulnerable with our service provider, and we're going to expect the same level of transparency and vulnerability from them. So I think it's a wonderful list. And thanks for sharing that. I hope I didn't completely bastardize it by reshuffling the deck there.
No, you did a fine job, Joe. I might add one thing that I think is critical for any project and the success, and that is for the owner to identify who it is on their team that is the lead. They may have often referred to as an owner's project manager. Who is it in their organization? Who is that one party who is responsible for executing this project? Because so often, if you're running an elevator or if you have your facility, whatever it might be, you've got a day job. And it may not be engineering or construction related. Now, some firms or larger firms may have staffs of people that do this type of work. But so often we're talking about facilities where someone has primary responsibility, and then this change condition comes, which is, executing a project and adjusting that facility or remodeling. And we just need to know who it is that is that go-to, who's going to stay involved throughout the whole process, and make sure that at every step along the way, the communication and the collaboration that needs to exist, because we as service providers are guests to that facility, that's happening properly and we're all staying safe and we understand that we're getting a quality product and that sort of thing. So I think you did a fine job with the list, and just some other thoughts there.
No, I think when everybody owns it, nobody owns it.
That is so true.
It's kind of almost so obvious you forget to say it. But again, that's the value of expert counsel when you're getting ready to sign the contracts and you're walking out the door and everyone's heading out to the airport or back into the rental car. And you say, wait a minute, who's the one person we call and tell when things are not going well, right? So that brings me to something I want to talk about. We don't need to spend a lot of time here, but you talked about some firms will have in-house people that have roles that are largely dedicated to projects. And it could be the procurement aspect, it could be the design, it could be supporting the construction in the field, the commissioning of the plant, whatever it might be. And then other firms tend to outsource that entirely, right? And they work with their one or two or three select suppliers. And I think I've also observed, particularly as organizations get larger, there tends to be a pendulum swing where at some point in time, they've largely in-housed or insourced their engineering, their design activities. They've insourced their procurement. They have a very tight procurement strategy. And then they really narrow down the groups they work with to actually do the construction and build. And then other times I put that pendulum will swing and they'll say, well, we're going to 100% variable expense. It's all going out the door. And this comes back and forth and back and forth. I don't want to ask you why that happens, because I think that would just be a meandering, abstract conversation and probably not very additive. But as we talk to the owners and the operators of small to lower middle market agribusinesses, many of them are either now or will be soon creatures of consolidation and acquisition. As you grow, there's a tendency to want to centralize some of this decision making, to bring things in-house. As a service provider that works with a number of different companies that has seen this pendulum swing, what would you say to those owner operators that's saying, okay, look, if you're going to bring your procurement process 100% in-house, or you're going to have a tight strategy around it, or you bring your engineering in-house and you're going to tightly control it to corporate standards or whatever that might be, what are the things that they need to think about to make that actually work effectively in the field when they start to work with their external partners to actually start to pour the cement and raise the bins?
That's a good question. I think as we reflect on what we've seen in different organizations, especially over the last 25 years of working in the ag space and watching consolidation, you see a lot of small, what we used to refer to as mom and pop organization that now is part of a corporate in some cases. And just the expectations change and there's a lot of dynamics in that situation. But I think for them, the balance between operators and procurement strategies is really important. We see it so often kind of shifting within larger organizations. And I think the same could be true for some of the mid-size or smaller firms too, is where we start to look at it through, a procurement lens or more of a finance set of objectives, absent the operator's needs and, the utility and functionality and those sorts of things. And this again is really takes us back to this having the right parties at the table early on, working through to understand really those overriding objectives. And it may include all things. There certainly is a finance component in any capital investment that we're making. And, you think about it, we see it so often in this sense. Until in some organizations, it becomes a capital project, we're running on expense. So we don't want to have, you really want to control that expense side. And, I don't know if we want to do this consulting. And so there's this dynamic that's kind of working against us a bit to get on with the capital and get off of this situation where we're having to expense all those front-end costs or sub-consultant costs and that sort of thing. And so maybe it's just organizationally coming to terms and making sure that some of that work is happening before the service provider shows up, or making sure that we are clear about what we're going to ask when we're going out for RFPs or qualifications requests that we're making of the marketplace. I can tell you one thing contractors, sometimes struggle with this is when we're asked to provide proposals, competing proposals without maybe the same set of expectations or clarity about communication. And you're going to reflect what you believe the owner might need, or you might have strategies in terms of how you're responding. And I think at the end of the day, those situations are hard because owner may not get what they want.
Yeah, I love this idea. Some of my words here, I'd say, monitoring the daylight between the operators and the procurement strategy. And they're not the only two bodies here, but let's use that as an example. Sure. You likely don't want your entire CapEx strategy to be executed by your operations team without supervision, right?
Right.
You may overspend, you may overbuild. That's not their expertise, nor do you want it to be solely a tabletop exercise through a procurement process that has RFP scoring that's divorced from truly understanding what is this going to look like when we operate it in the field. And the idea of getting your ducks in a row, keeping your team aligned in-house before you go to the market is really important. I've personally experienced both working for a large organization and then also being on the outside trying to navigate some of these things is sometimes the well-intended procurement strategy, very well-intended and professionally designed, if left unchecked and unsupervised, sort of spins out of control to the point where a scoring sheet is making all the decisions. And it's incredibly frustrating because it often won't capture some of the contextual, cultural, skill level things that may not, but might change or at least invite discussion around the outcome of how a decision is made. If it was as easy as, let's get all these RFPs from these 10 contractors, let's plug them into the RFP sheet, it's going to spit out a number. If it was that easy, in fact, then procurement professionals writ large should be very nervous because that sounds like a job perfectly designed for an LLM, right? To take the RFPs and say, this is the contractor. Would you like me to move forward with contracting with them? Send them our contract. And so, yeah, I do think that you don't want to necessarily give the keys to just procurement nor just the operators, but sort of minimizing the daylight between the two. So for folks that are listening that are going through a consolidation or are starting to look at centralizing processes, think about where the ownership is assigned, the nature of that ownership, how that might ripple through to the actual outcomes you get. We're coming up at the end of our time here today, Matt, and there's something that I really wanted to talk about and ask you about because I know you're passionate about it and it's highly relevant. Something very interesting about your business is that you're in the business of applying soft assets, people, talent, skills, and culture. Mm-hmm. Applying soft assets to the work of building and delivering hard assets or plants to your customers. And we there's been a lot of ink spilled, including on this show, about labor challenges and generational shifts and, workforce availability. And Ankeny, Iowa is wonderful, but, it's also not the largest MSA in the country. And so I'm sure you have your own challenges with labor, et cetera. But I guess as we look at the end here, what is the labor picture like for the work that you do? And what have you guys been doing to help find and attract and develop and retain the right human capital for your business?
So labor is tight. Everywhere we go in the country, labor is tight. Just as you described, there's been, retirements and attrition in the industry, and we've lost a ton of knowledge and expertise that's leaving every day, and it's hard to replace that. We have embraced the idea early on. We embraced the idea of trying to build a long-term success strategy based on training and development programs. So early on, so we started in 2014. In 2015, we created a merit shop Millwright apprenticeship program. And the idea was, one, it was to build a workforce that would eventually lead to us having qualified field supervisors, eventually leading to superintendents, to really build tradespeople who are prepared to do the work. So we talk about principally, one of our guiding principles is protect people. And protect people is about safety and personnel safety, the safety of our customers and so on. But it's also about protecting our seat at the table. And what we often talk about is we have to have team members that are prepared to go do that work. So it was early. It was one of those endeavors that you bring your hands a little bit, because what we did was set out to build a set of courses, 4 years worth of education, on-the-job training, as well as classroom instruction. And there's no substitute. It was level 1, and then you build level 2 and 3 and 4, so on. I'm happy to say that 10 years in, this year we'll have 25 Millwrights in our programs. And actually, I said Millwrights, we also have expanded some of our trade training to other related adjacent trades. And it's one of the most important investments that we've made as a business. As a matter of fact, when we talk to customers about it, there's an interesting discussion that tends to spur with discussion with customers. When we talk about this, we often find them asking for opportunities to connect their team members with our coursework and our instruction, because they value it as well, and they see the same gaps, or they're experiencing the same qualified labor issues.
Which is the ultimate validation of the people that are usually collecting invoices from, actually saying, look, we'd like to send something in the direction. Can you help to train up some of our people? I mean, that's the ultimate validation of value, and that it was the right call. That's great that you both saw the need so early. As you said, you wrung your hands, said, let's go do this. And I think it's reflected also, of course, the growth of your organization. Matt, we're up against the clock today. I know you're a busy guy and got places to go and other folks you need to talk to. So I just wanted to say, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been really interesting for me personally. I know it's going to be highly additive to our listeners. We will make sure that we've got links to both yourself and to Keen Project Solutions in the show notes. So for folks that are listening, if capital investment to expand and build new capacity is part of your strategy, I'd encourage you guys to reach out and reach out to Matt and Keen and get in touch. But yeah, thanks again for joining us and being part of the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate the opportunity.
It's great. And to our listeners, thank you as always for tuning into today's episode. I am confident that you found something of interest and applicable value. And assuming you did, I ask you to do one simple thing. Please consider sharing this episode with someone that you think would find similar benefit. It's the very best way you can support the show, and the best way you can help us elevate thinking around strategy execution all along the ag supply chain. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.